And in the work I do with regards to public banking, the whole concept of governments owning banks makes people roll their eyes or cross their eyes or look askance. And so the best person I've seen to tell this story is a 12-year-old girl from Canada. The story is being written as we speak. We put her video live 2 days ago, and just in 48 hours we've gotten 20,000 hits. Two weeks ago she spoke at the Public Banking Institute conference in Philadelphia, and I'm going to have her tell her story right now.
It was about 5 or 6 weeks ago that Victoria spoke to a group of 600 people at a Rotary Club, and she's going to be giving the same speech to us today. And as I saw it, I think a week or so after it hit the web, it started going around, and so I quickly got on the phone and heard that saying, invited me here. And so we have a very special treat. So Victoria, come on up.
Have you ever wondered why Canada is in debt? Have you ever wondered why the government forces Canadians to pay so many taxes? Have you ever wondered why the bankers from the largest private banks are becoming wealthier and the rest of us are not? Have you ever wondered why the gross national debt is over $800 billion? Or why we are spending $160 million a day on the interest of the national debt? That's $60 billion a year. Have you ever wondered who receives the $60 billion? What I've discovered is the banks and the government have colluded to financially enslave the people of Canada. I will share with you 3 important points of reference which will hopefully spark enough interest and concern for you to continue the research on your own and to engage your government to stop this criminal act against the people of Canada. First, we will briefly examine the Bank of Canada. Second, we will see how our banking system works today. And lastly, I will offer a viable solution that we can petition our government to implement. A very little-known figure in Canadian history is Gerald McGeer. He was a lawyer, member of Parliament, and mayor of Vancouver. His contribution to Canada is probably the greatest in our history. He championed the creation of the National Bank of Canada, whose sole purpose is to create and manage Canada's money. It was founded on July 3, 1934, and owned by all Canadians. Until the 1970s, because of the Bank of Canada, Canada's national debt was held at a constant, manageable level, until the government decided to implement what we now have as our modern-day banking system that is robbing the Canadian people. So how are they robbing us? Allow me to explain how our private banks and government work today. First, the Canadian government borrows money from the private banks. They then lend the debt-based money to Canada with compounded interest. The government then continues to increase taxation of Canadians year after year in order to pay back the interest on the exponentially growing national debt. What results is inflation, less real money for Canadians to spend into our economy, and the real money being used to pad the pockets of the banks. Also, the government gave the banks the ability to loan out money that doesn't exist in the form of loans. When a bank gives you a mortgage, which literally means a death pledge, or a loan, they don't actually give you money. They click a key on a computer and generate the fake money out of thin air. They don't actually have it in their bank vaults. Presently, the banks only have $4 billion on reserve, but they have loaned out over $1.5 trillion. To quote Grant Towers, each and every time a bank makes a loan, a new bank credit is created. New deposits, brand new money. Broadly speaking, all new money comes out of a bank in the form of loans. As loans are debt, then under the present system, all money is debt. What I find interesting is even Jesus in Matthew 21 drove up the money changers in the temple because they were manipulating the currency to steal money from the people. The private banks are just like the money changers in Matthew 21. They are defrauding and robbing the people of Canada, thus their freedom, and they need to be stopped. How should the banking system work? In an infamous interview, Mr. McGeer asked Mr. Towers, "Can you tell me why a government with power to create money should give that power away to a private monopoly and then borrow that which Parliament can create itself back at interest to the point of national bankruptcy?" Mr. Towers replied, "If Parliament wants to change the form of operating the banking system, then certainly that is within the powers of Parliament. In other words, if the Canadian government needs money, they can borrow it directly from the Bank of Canada. The people would then pay fair taxes to repay the Bank of Canada. This tax money would in turn get injected back into our economic infrastructure and the debt would be wiped out. Canadians would again prosper with real money as a foundation of our economic structure and not debt money. Regarding the debt money owed to the private banks, such as the Royal Bank, we would simply have the Bank of Canada print the money owing, hand it over to the private banks, and then clear the debt with the Bank of Canada. And yes, we have the power and lawful right to do so. In conclusion, it has become painfully obvious, even for me, a 12-year-old Canadian, that we are being defrauded and robbed by the banking system and a composite government. What will we do to stop this crime? What will we do to ensure that the next generation will be free and clear of the debt-based economy that enslaves them to the banks? Margaret Mead said the following, and I hope that all of you remember this. Never doubt that a small group of people can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. Thank you.
Okay. It's hard to follow that, but I'll do my best. Okay, so if you listen to that again and just substituted the county-owned Bank of Sonoma, it would be the same thing. We could have our own money supply here in Sonoma County by having our own bank. And I'll be talking about that in as much detail as I can, given the time. So I'll be talking more about how money is created. A lot of folks don't realize this, but money is created every day and it disappears. Every time you make a payment to pay off a loan, the money supply decreases with that payment. Every time you take out a loan, the money supply increases. So right now across the world, governments are talking about how we need to have austerity. And you know, very few set of choices. You either raise taxes in case of a revenue shortfall, you cut the services that are being provided, or you sell public assets. We had that same discussion here in Sonoma County. It doesn't need to be that way. We can be much more prosperous. Another way to frame this is, should government be involved in banking? That's the question a lot of people ask. But really the core question is, should Wall Street bankers be governing our money supply? Many folks like myself believe that money is a part of the commons. 99% of the money that's in circulation is governed by private banks. So when there's a contraction of the money supply, it's up to them to free it up and to provide more money. And they basically govern the money supply. The core question behind it is, who do you trust? Do you trust a public servant in a transparent and accountable organization, or do you trust Wall Street bankers? A public bank is simply a mechanism that allows for participatory democracy, where people can determine how much or what kind of loans are provided to provide for sustainable ag, to fund renewable energy businesses, to provide funding for co-ops. You know, if you go into any sort of a private bank right now and ask for a $100,000 loan or $1 million loan to fund those types of businesses, the answer is typically no. You're not going to get it. And that's because that very small group of people, private banks, have decided that's not their value. Whereas we as a people can decide that those are values that we have, sustainability being rising to the top, and provide money available to fund those enterprises. In Sonoma County, most of the pension fund is invested through money center banks. And there is a broad recognition across the industry, the pension fund industry, 4 years ago, that there was way too much risk associated with that, because when you have systemic risk and there's a collapse like there was 4 years ago, everybody takes a hit. Some pension funds went down as low as 30 or 40%. We're talking about tens and hundreds of billions of dollars. And so one way to diversify that risk is to take the money out of money center banks and invest locally in some of the items I mentioned. One day we will be announcing a Bank of Sonoma County. It'll create a source of revenue for the county, just like Bank of North Dakota in North Dakota does. They take excess revenue and apply it to their general budget. This past year they had $70 million in profits. A Bank of Sonoma County could be a mutual credit system, which they do in Switzerland, in the Vera Bank, where they have hundreds of businesses are part of this bank, and they trade with one another, not using the Swiss franc. They have a mutual credit system. And it's one of the reasons why the Swiss franc is so strong, is because they have this alternative currency or mutual credit system which funds businesses that they don't have enough Swiss francs for. They simply trade amongst themselves. We could do that here in Sonoma County. A Bank of Sonoma County could issue our own currency. So that's being done currently in Brazil. Brazil is opening up hundreds of Banco Palmas, which each bank has two currencies, the national currency as well as the local currency. There's no reason why we could not have a public Bank of Sonoma County issuing currency, free and clear, issuing currency to the people who are members of that bank. And there are different ways of doing that, so it's just, but it's up to the people to decide something like that. West.com, though, you can pay in two forms of currencies, either with points or with US dollars. Same thing with this. We could go into any independent business store with our mobile phone. If there was an app on it, we could pay with Sonoma currency or with US dollars or a combination of both. There's no reason why that can't happen. Or do we protect the status quo and say, well, those are all great ideas, but we don't have the money to fund it? And you could go to any one of these conference rooms today where people have great ideas, but there's no funding for it. A Bank of Sonoma County would do that. So we're shifting in terms of the national conversation. We've gone from social justice issues, and that have been very divisive left to right across the political spectrum, to now talking about economic justice, which is a fascinating switch. I think Occupy Wall Street has completely changed the conversation. If there's one thing that's been done because of Occupy Wall Street, it's changed the conversation to economic justice. Now, when you talk with a lot of Occupy folks, they keep dragging themselves back to the social justice issues and don't realize how powerful the economic justice conversation is. Because there truly is a 99% movement and a division between the 0.001% and the rest of us. There really should be an economic Bill of Rights. Roosevelt started this, I think it was in 45 when he did his last State of the Union speech. He enunciated a number of economic bills of rights associated with economics, like right to a job, etc. Nowadays we think, well, you can't do that because you are taking whatever you give to someone comes from somebody else. But if you look at money as being something that is not scarce, like me and many other people do, there's no way you can't. I mean, you can guarantee people a job. It's very possible. I'll give you some examples. But there are lots of divestment campaigns from Wall Street banks. Real wages have been stagnated. Anyway, the economic justice topic is just gaining some traction. Last year in China, there was a headline. They're planning on opening nearly 80 new airports over the next 4 or 5 years. Now, how can they do that? That's because China owns its own banks. They do not rely upon private banks to lend the money to fund public projects like that. Here's a perspective. Ellen Brown gave this in the conference the other 2 weeks ago. Basically, an alien comes to New Orleans, asks about why people aren't working, is there enough material, etc., and everybody's saying there's plenty, but to get work done here, we need these little pieces of green paper. And the alien says, beam me up, there's no sign of intelligent life here. So there are tens of millions of jobs to be done, and there are lots of people wanting to do them, and the only thing standing in the way is money or lack thereof. And I think the problem is how we define wealth in this country. If you go to 9 out of 10 people, they would say wealth is money. In China, they view wealth as being productive capacity. And they use money to create the productive capacity of their country. And that's one of the reasons why they're growing. Here, we define wealth as being money. And so we are unbolting our productive capacity and shipping it overseas, and we are not putting in the investment we need in order to stimulate or create the ability for our communities to create the goods and services needed to take care of all of us within that community. Even our tacos, the San Francisco State University did a study of a taco that was bought in the Mission and looked at the supply chain. And if you look at the supply chain of that one little taco bought in the Mission District, the only thing that came from the Bay Area was salt. Everything else came from either the Midwest or typically overseas. And so, you know, that's what happens when you have these very long supply chains. True costs are not really reflected, and carbon-based transportation is underwritten. So Occupy Wall Street is really playing with fire. Henry Ford said this nearly 100 years ago. It's well enough that the people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system. If they did, there'd be a revolution before tomorrow morning. Banks' only product is debt, and it's in their interest to have us think that money is both valuable and scarce. So we would then pay them for the use of that money. We already know that money is not valuable. The gold-based standard went away 40 years ago. So there's nothing behind the currency, okay, other than what you can use it when you spend it. But it's much like frequent flyer miles. It's created out of nothing, and you use it to buy stuff like a seat on an airplane. But there's no inherent value in the money. So money is not valuable. We know that. What we need to understand is that it doesn't need to be scarce. Banks control the supply of the money, of money. And we can take the reins of that. North Dakota did that a long time ago. So now they have their unemployment rate down near 2%, and they have budget surpluses because they control their money supply. There are other factors involved, but the core issue is that they're not beholden to private banks to issue their money. So when you look at double entry accounting for a bank, a deposit is a credit, it's a liability. For a bank, a deposit is something they owe, so it's a liability, and they credit it. And because it's double entry accounting, it's got to be offset. It's offset by an asset, which is a loan, okay? And up until year 2000, most of the money in a bank went out as loans, okay? So that was really important because you typically lend money locally. But because of the repeal of Glass-Steagall, now banks can take that money and invest in securities in Chinese manufacturers overseas or buy Brazilian bonds or whatever. They have no obligation to the community from which the deposits were created. But there's something missing from this picture. What's not here is they don't create interest. Now, if most of the money supply, 99% of the money supply is through loans, who's creating the interest to pay back that loan, to help pay back that loan? Nobody is. So you have to have this ever-expanding economy with more and more loans taken out to pay back the interest on previous loans. So it's artificial scarcity, which really is not necessary at all because of the nature of compound interest. And it's not a problem until you have a contracting economy. We've been very fortunate the last few decades in that we've had expanding economies and the money supply keeps growing, more debt's taken out, and the interest can be paid because more debt is taken out. But nowadays, that's not the situation at all. The money supply has shrunk by $3 trillion in the last 4 years. So remember the definition of inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. We always remember it's too much money, but we forget that it's chasing too few goods. Alan Brown, the founder of the Public Banking Institute, says that the banks create the principal but not the interest. And people in the Federal Reserve have said this. Thomas Edison, 90 years ago, there's some wonderful articles in the New York Times from back in 1921 or so. They're on our website, on the home page. And he just rails against the financiers. It's amazing. But he says, it's a terrible situation when the government, to increase our national wealth, must go into debt and submit to ruinous interest. Kind of what Victoria was talking about. So in Canada, they've paid over $1 trillion in interest over the last few years. Here in the States, it's been over $8 trillion. And we're paying that interest to banks because they're lending us the money. And yet our government, because it's sovereign, it really could issue its own money. It could issue treasury notes. But we use Federal Reserve notes. There's no reason why we can't do that. And so I just want to say as an aside, in Sonoma County, obviously we aren't the Treasury, we aren't the U.S. Treasury, but we can use the banking model, have it be owned by the public, by the people, have a bank be owned by the people and issue loans to ourselves, low interest rates, and then any profit that is made is paid back to the bank or which is to the people, or to the Sonoma County government. It's a very simple concept. We're not changing anything at all. But interest is something you really have to understand. Whenever you look at infrastructure, like public housing, over 70% of the cost is associated with interest. Okay, when you look at drinking water, which is also heavily a lot of infrastructure, it's nearly 40%. The garbage collection, which is more service-oriented, people-oriented, it's not as much. But on average, a product, let's say this sold for $200, 40% of the cost will be associated with the interest that suppliers of this product paid up and down the supply chain. Okay, so it's a huge number. And whenever you look at how the government should cut, from the discretionary budget, they always put, social good things on it, or things that are going to hurt the people. They never talk about how interest could be cut. If we paid interest to ourselves in our own bank, we could basically have self-financing for free. California has paid over $7 billion in interest. A good example for California is the Bay Bridge. We all have gone across the retrofit. That Bay Bridge is costing over $6 billion in materials and services to retrofit. Another $6 billion is being paid in interest and fees. So here, what happened is we went to the New York bankers to do the financing. They cut the deal with us, and then some of their Japanese manufacturers that they're invested in, are providing some of the steel for it. And where are the jobs for Californians? I mean, what we could have done is finance that completely with our own public bank of California, and we could have had the stipulation that the jobs were created here. In North Dakota, the Bank of North Dakota says for every $100,000 that is lent, a new job needs to be created. So they have their jobs program as part of the bank.
We are out of time.
Oh, we're out of time, okay. This is something Rochelle said a while ago, and actually because of the debt system that we're all involved with, it's actually tremendously freeing to realize that every dollar in your pocket, every dollar in your check account is debt that somebody else has taken out. And issue our own loans to our own businesses, and by doing that, provide fair and reasonable cost loans. So if there's one thing to do, talk to your county supervisors. This is going to be a big issue this election year. It's going to be something that I'll be talking more with the supervisors about this summer and fall. And if you support this, would love you to voice that to the county supervisors. Thank you very much.